Hello, my name is Nancy Curley, and I am here with my good friends Sherana Francis and Marydale Scheller to reminisce about our dear friend Maryjane Dunstan, who was inducted into the Marin Women's Hall of Fame posthumously in 2005, and the criteria category for which she was nominated and inducted is community service. You have had a chance to see the portrait of Maryjane, which was painted by her dear friend and business partner, Sherana, whom you can tell is a very talented artist. And I'm going to call on you first, if I may, Sherana, and ask you what you remember about where Maryjane was born and what she might have shared with you about her childhood growing up.
Well, I do know that she was born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and when she told me that, after I got to know her better, I always thought of her as the Star of Bethlehem, because for me and for so many of her friends who got to know her, she was a guiding light in my life and in so many others. And I know not too much about her childhood, except that she took tap dancing lessons when she was a youngster, but she much preferred outdoor sports and had a dream to become a journalist and sports writer, but that field was not open to women at the time. So she gave that dream up and concentrated on just journalism. And she has a niece and a nephew who are the son and daughter of her brother who died when he was in his prime. And I also remember her telling me that her favorite time was spent in her grandfather's house in Bethlehem, because he had a very extensive library collection. And she spent a lot of time in there browsing through his books and got a taste for far-off lands and adventure. And that carried her a number of places in her life, that excitement about the travels in the books. Yeah.
And we have recently received the letter from her niece, as I recall. And is there anything that you want to share with the content of that letter?
Yes. Her niece, Debbie Dunstan, wrote a 3-page letter, but I'm only going to excerpt just a couple of items from it, because they really encompass how Maryjane made people feel. All her friends, I think, including the two of us, felt very special and very close to her. And her niece had something to say about how she felt growing up with Aunt Maryjane. She said she remembers a lot of things, but what especially she says is, I remember how she made me feel. When we talked, she made me feel like I was the most special, smartest, funniest, an interesting kid on earth. Of course I was not, but that's how she made me feel. And then further on she says, I remember her ability to make everyone she knew feel special, feel loved, feel cared about. Her gift of teaching and learning from everyone she knew, I remember. Her legacy of activism and trying to make this world a kinder, peaceful, and just and tolerant world, and her appreciation and regard for everyone she knew. And she went on to say other things, but it was especially her feeling about her special aunt that I just wanted to quote here.
Thank you. We've all agreed that we'd like to say how each of us met Maryjane. So may I start with you, Sherana, since you've known her the longest, and then we'll just go around in a circle.
I met Maryjane about a little over 30 years ago, and I met her at a friend's house where I was invited for dinner, and where she had invited an author and another person who was a poet, and some mutual friends of ours. And Maryjane was the author. And we soon discovered, we really bonded over conversation about books and art. And I discovered we had so many interests in common that we developed a real close friendship from then on, and we shared a lot of books, exchanged them back and forth. And then I discovered we also had a mutual and very common to us dream of being surrounded by books in a bookstore, and perhaps an art workshop or art gallery, so, which later on we did realize.
All right. Mary Dale.
Well, and that's where I met Maryjane, at the bookstore, which was supposedly after she had retired from the College of Marin. She and Sherana opened the Artist Proof Bookstore on Magnolia Street in Larkspur. And I was very naive. I just walked in thinking I was going to buy a book. And all of a sudden I saw a computer in the front so customers could use the personal computer. I found women's books displayed, local books displayed. I heard people talking about what was happening in Larkspur and what we needed to do to make our community work better for us. And then I met Maryjane, and she was this beautiful gray-haired lady with a gentle, sweet smile and a backbone of steel.
We all remember that.
And I remember I walked in to buy a book, and I walked up signing up for some political endeavor.
Very typical.
Grabbing people off the street.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about literary luncheons, because
Oh, yes.
that's such an important part of the bookstore.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with having gone to a few?
Well, I went into the bookstore one day, and Maryjane said, "You must come to my first literary luncheon." I said, "Okay." And at that time, we met at Fabrizio's restaurant, I believe, and she would bring in authors, some local, some national, but all well known. And Maryjane had the amazing ability to interview people in a way that not only brought the book alive, but it brought the author alive.
I met Maryjane again at the bookstore in 1974. I don't think you had been open terribly long, but my husband at that time was a city councilman in Larkspur, and he had been working on some local issues in which Maryjane was also involved. And he was so impressed by her intellect and her enthusiasm and the way she really wanted to get something done. She didn't just want to have meetings and talk about it. She wanted to accomplish something. My husband very much enjoyed working with her, so he said, "Come on down, the bookstore's open, let's go meet Maryjane." And that was the beginning of a very long and wonderful friendship, which involved many of Maryjane's personal friends and became a kind of extended family for all of us. It turned out that the four of us, Maryjane, Sherana, my husband, and I, are all movie buffs. And so for years and years and years, we went to movies together, sometimes with careful planning in advance, and sometimes just on the spur of the moment. Let's talk a little bit about Maryjane's distinguished teaching career. And again, we need to call on you, Sherana, to remind us of that.
Well, again, I have to refer to notes because it's so extensive, and I don't think I could remember all of it, except what I jotted down is that she did attend in Bethlehem while she was still there, Moravian College for Women. And that was in the early 1940s, and then she joined the Waves, the United States Waves, in 45, and served for a little over a year, and that brought her to San Francisco, which is the city she fell in love with and settled in, and went to University of California in Berkeley from there in the mid-40s. Got her BA and MA in language arts from San Francisco State later. And in 1958, she went to Burma as a Fulbright lecturer and taught at the State Teachers Training College in Burma, 2 years in Rangoon and 2 years in Mandalay, and then returned to the States and taught briefly at Merritt College in Oakland, and then she joined the faculty in 1963 at the College of Marin, where she started and chaired the communications department and started courses on what was really her dream, how to affect the future of the planet and how to affect the future of every person on the planet. And she called this course Inventing the Future, and it became an interdisciplinary course in the college. And she taught there for a number of years until she retired in 1986, I believe it was, that she retired, 1983. And she was always looking for ways to change the status quo that wasn't working, not only for the planet and the environment, but again for the business section of our cities and towns and transportation systems. And so she was always educating people in ways that had nothing to do with her teaching curriculum, but she, as you know, and you know in the bookstore, she started many programs there to educate people for learning on computers, grab them for service in all the volunteer capacities that she could dream up to help the business and the environment of the city and even further afield. So there was one other thing she did, which I thought was, true to her calling as a visionary. She started the first Futures Fair at the College of Marin. After bringing in a number of speakers who talked about future events or who were science fiction people who envisioned a more creative way to live. Not, for instance, one future, but many futures. And we always teach our kids, what are you going to be when you grow up? And they're a fireman, or a policeman. But her vision was you could be a fireman and a policeman and a teacher and an artist and whatever you choose to be, and do them all. You don't have to be one. And she brought people like Edgar Mitchell to address her students and to inspire them. And she brought Margaret Mead. She brought any number of people to the college, including Bucky Fuller. And the Futures Fair that she oversaw, she had the students build a geodesic dome, which was modeled after the one that Bucky Fuller had pioneered. And so that's pretty much what I remember about her teaching. I think students from her futures classes went on to do wonderful things in the world. We know some people like Connie Butel, who was her student, and a great many people who were her students who went on to really change their part of the world to the better because of her inspiration and her vision.
She had a very distinguished career.
She did, indeed.
Since Maryjane was nominated for community service and then inducted to become a member of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame in that category, we want to talk about her community service. So I'll start at the very local level, having just to do with Larkspur. and remember that she was extremely dedicated to local issues. And she took the time and the trouble to learn about them, often going right directly to the planning department and talking with the city planning staff, or even to the city manager to get answers about what was going on. I was always impressed with her determination and her dedication, because it took a lot of energy to get all of this done. And after all, she had a career as a teacher and as a retail shop owner. But always she had the energy to get these done. Even when she was very tired and she was already in her 70s, she would go to meetings that many of us would skip. And then she would spread the word back to us about what had happened and what was the next step and what we might consider doing to solve local issues. Another thing that she did that we all remember her for was the establishment of the Larkspur Community Association. I remember how that evolved because as a shop owner, a retailer in downtown Larkspur, Maryjane joined the Larkspur Chamber of Commerce. Perhaps you recall this too. And she went to several of their meetings and she was exceedingly disappointed because the group mostly got together to have lunch together once a month and just talk about themselves, really, and compare notes. It wasn't a chamber with an outlook toward the community. And she was convinced that if there could be a combination of business owners with community members, that together we could make a difference, not only in the business community, but in our community at large. And indeed, create a community spirit. So that's what she worked on by establishing the Larkspur Community Association. Indeed, it still exists today, and it's done many wonderful things for downtown Larkspur. I think one of the very first visible things they did was hang up the little banners downtown that said Larkspur with the symbol of the blossom of Larkspur on it. Not too long after its founding, the Community Association sponsored the Larkspur Flower and Food Festival. Now, when she began that festival through the Community Association, we had the very vital Niven Nursery right on the borderline of the downtown historic district where all the retailers were. And we also had the Eubanks florist, and Catherine Eubanks had quite a regional reputation for beautiful flower arranging and so on. So these were some of the local talents that were highlighted at the festival. And indeed, that festival still exists today with many of our well-known chefs demonstrating wonderful cooking recipes and talents, and still people arranging flowers and showing us that kind of an artistic pursuit. So we are indebted to her still for that festival, which now closes down 2 blocks of Magnolia Avenue on a Sunday afternoon or a weekend afternoon, and provides wonderful music, demonstrations for the locals, wine tasting, beer tasting, great food, and plenty of entertainment for the youngsters. She was always involved with providing outlets for the children too. So that's what I remember about her early days of, and the growth of her ideas in Larkspur. And Mary Dale, I wonder if you'd be good enough to share some of the other memories that you have of her local and regional pursuits.
Well, I keep going back to going in the bookstore to buy a book. And I would be in there and she'd say, I want you to come to the city council meeting with me. And it would be I have no idea what we would be going on. But we would, whatever the issue was, she would have a group of us following along behind her. And so many things were done in Larkspur, as we talked about. But I'm also recalling that she was very interested in affordable housing.
Oh, yeah.
And she did so much, both at the Larkspur and the county level in that regard. And right before she died, she got 2 housing projects approved and sponsored by the Ecumenical Association for Housing. And they dedicated those in her name, which I think we were all very pleased that she was recognized that way.
Yes.
And may I just add one thing to that, because I was with her because I was caring for her on her last days, and the call came in from Betty Paget and Mary Murtaugh from the EAH that the low-income housing had been approved and it was going to be built at some future time, but that she got it through. And she said, and we are having a dinner in your honor, and we're all here, and we're all congratulating you and all that. And she was on her day before her death, and she could barely hear it, but I was holding the phone to her ear, and when she hung up, she said, "Why am I so special?" You know, and that was so typical of her. She didn't realize really what a valued person she was in the world.
And it was in the world. I mean, it wasn't just Larkspur. She did the same thing at the county level.
Yeah,
she did the same thing at the federal level. And she got a crew of us to join in with those projects as well.
Right.
And I also think, when I think of Maryjane, I think of her supporting women in the political process, encouraging women to run for office. Often she would be the manager of their campaign and get other people involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and she was a board member of the National Political Caucus, and she was the chairperson of the Older Women's Political Caucus, and quite active in many of the areas.
And all of those late in her life.
Yes.
Yes. Very, very enthusiastic. Mary Dale, will you tell us a little about some of the awards that Maryjane received also?
Well, she was awarded at all these levels, too. Larkspur elected her the Citizen of the Year, and they voted her the Senior Citizen of the Year a few years later. At the county level, the American Women's Commission designated her its Woman of Vision, Passion, and Wisdom. The Marin Democratic Central Committee honored her with the Lifetime Achievement Award, and the Marin County Board of Supervisors dedicated a Maryjane Dunstan Day, which was dedicated to her and the services that she had given throughout the county. And then at the state level, the state legislature recognized her for improving the lives of women, and the state senate awarded her for distinguished service in education. Now, at the federal level,
keep going up.
that's right. On January 9th, 2003, which was 20 days following her death, Senator Barbara Boxer entered her name, along with her accomplishments, into the congressional record of the 108th Congress of the United States. So to me, she made her contributions on a wide range, and we are the beneficiaries of those contributions. And it seems very appropriate that the Marin Hall of Fame has chosen to select her in this regard, particularly in the area of community service.
A matter of weeks before Maryjane passed away, as we all remember, she wrote an amazing letter and mailed it to all of her family and friends. And it was the most honest, heartfelt letter dealing with transition from the state of life we know to whatever may be the next state that my husband and I had ever received. And so when we three have talked about it, we decided that a little quote from that letter would be the appropriate way to end our reflections about Mary Jane's life. So I read a very few sentences from that letter. It begins, "I do have regrets, including, I regret that I cannot hop out of bed and walk down Magnolia Avenue today, or that I'm not out on the links trying for another hole in one. And I regret that I am not able to send daily emails to our elected officials seeking their active leadership for peaceful problem solving and UN negotiations rather than wars and more killing fields. Yet, treasuring each moment I continue to have in this time and space, I feel a measure of peace. I contemplate my life, seeing that I have had the good fortune to become myself. I evolved in a culture when we women gained some rights and are now emerging as leaders for a just and peaceful world."